That was the opening of Insomniac Games' Ratchet and Clank 2 Going Commando. My first exposure to the company and the series, and they already had a memorable moment and the game hasn't even started yet. In case you were unaware, this video on Ratchet and Clank 2 follows up upon the video I did last week on the first Ratchet and Clank. If you haven't seen that, it's highly recommended. For the people who backed me on Patreon, they got to see this video several weeks ago now. For as low as $1, you can become one of those people and get access to my video on Ratchet and Clank 3 right now, or wait until it drops next week. Your choice. Just as a heads up, I'm almost always going to refer to this game as Ratchet and Clank 2 or Ratchet 2 during this video for simplicity's sake. I always thought the title was Ratchet and Clank 2 Going Commando. The logo is shaped like a 2, or at least that's how I see it anyway. Clearly the Europeans didn't think the title was funny, so overseas it's just Ratchet and Clank 2 Locked and Loaded or Ratchet and Clank 2, so let's just call it Ratchet 2, and then that'll be that. Ratchet and Clank 2 is one of my favorite games of all time, and that always adds a certain amount of pressure when doing a review on it. You want to do that game justice, and you want to make a video that will stand the test of time, and not be something you'd hate looking back in a year or so. Seriously, you could set your watch to this effect. I've reviewed Ratchet and Clank 2 before, but I don't really count that stuff. I mean, it's so old, unlike how I make videos now, that in my mind it doesn't really count as one of my reviewing my favorite things videos, because back in the day, it was just nice to be able to make videos at all, let alone good ones. I mean, in the Ratchet and Clank 2 video, it was June, so that obviously meant the temperature was up, and I started making videos in the winter, so how was I supposed to know that the air conditioner would be 100% audible in the voiceover?
The upgrades make an addition to the weapon's abilities like better lock-on, or a bigger blast radius. You can upgrade your health with experience as well by killing enemies with any weapon.
See, that's so hilariously bad that I just look back and chuckle. But back to the game. It's interesting to note that most of my favorite games tend to be sequels to original games. Most likely because in these games you can see developers taking things that worked well and making them even better and more refined. And even then, games that I really like that aren't numbered 2 are still building upon well-established ideas. I don't talk about Ratchet 2 as much as, say, Sly 2 or Mega Man X, but I still never hesitate to think of it when asked about my favorite games of all time. This game's a textbook case of the effect I just mentioned. Ratchet 1 was a pretty damn good game, but as I discussed in the last video, there are several issues I have with it that a good sequel could expand upon, like the controls and difficulty balancing and the writing. The critics at the time, without the aid of hindsight, said that the arsenal of weapons made Ratchet 1 stand out from the crowd of 3D platformers and that the next generation visuals and animations were fantastic. But criticism was given towards the writing and the unlikable characters. I would not go that far, but still. My point is that Ratchet 1 was a hit, financially and critically, so it was clear that another one needed to be made. They had a lot of confidence in this brand, as the sequel actually began development before the first one came out. And for the sequel, the franchise got a makeover in Japan. Adaptability for different regions is a sign of strength when it comes to designing mascot characters, if you ask me. The first game in Japan just showed Ratchet and Clank standing in the sky, but now we have this new art style for the games that I think looks fantastic. I don't like Japanese Ratchet's giant eyebrows, but the art looks great. Something Ratchet and Clank has over both Sly Cooper and Jak and Daxter is that the developers knew where to take the series from Game 1 to Game 2. The PS2 era was interesting because of the fact that the mascot platformer was starting to lose market dominance when compared to more mature games with larger worlds. Something I'm sure these companies struggled with because back in the 90s, a colorful mascot basically meant your game had an audience of some kind, whether it was good or not. Jak 1 was a collectathon, a genre that was falling out of style, and the first Sly Cooper was a point A to point B platformer like Crash on PS1, which was also falling out of style. The sequels to those games completely changed directions, going for open world gameplay. But for Ratchet, they stuck to their guns and honed in on what made the first game good to begin with. They were first able to up their game in the presentation. Visually speaking, I'd say Ratchet 2 is about on par with the first one. While this one doesn't have as many awe-inspiring, next-gen tech demonstrating locales, it still looks quite good, crafting unique looks for each stage in a game that heavily revolves around corporate and urban settings. Once more, I'm not looking at the version of the HD collection because it's even worse than Ratchet 1. If you were to play Ratchet 1 in the HD collection, even if you had a PS2 copy to play, I wouldn't fault you too much, but for the sequels, this collection is awful. You can start with how rough and uneven the HUD of Ratchet 2 now looks. You can talk about how the 16:9 pre-rendered video is cleaning up poorly and being squished down to 4:3 for no reason. You could mention Clank's eyes not aligning with his head in the title screen. But the only reason I need to never touch this garbage again is this. Your eyes do not deceive you. Ratchet wears a helmet throughout Ratchet 2 and Ratchet 3, and on the HD collection, somehow the model of the helmet doubled in size and now just floats around Ratchet's head. This is in every cutscene for the entire game. It looks so bad. Of course, there is one benefit to playing the game on the HD collection from a presentation standpoint. I'm guessing a large source of the problems from 6th gen remasters come from many of the original games being 4:3, Putting it in widescreen means stuff you wouldn't see before is now on screen. Some 6th gen games did have 16:9 modes, however many of them are, for lack of a better term, faux widescreen. The image will look like this in 4:3, but turn on 16:9 and it'll look like this. It achieves a widescreen image by cropping the image to fill the screen to a degree to where it doesn't harm gameplay. The Jak and Daxter HD collection just leaves it at the faux widescreen angle because all 3 games already had the faux widescreen setting, and doing it over would take more time and money, something I'd imagine these devs didn't have to spend. For Ratchet and Sly, they basically had no choice. For Sly, all 3 games were 4:3, so they had to give all 3 real widescreen, where it takes the 4:3 image and shows the rest of it. For Ratchet, the first game has no widescreen mode, faux or otherwise, so they couldn't just do what Jak did. They had to give every game a true widescreen view, which is nice, but like I said, those other problems are just too awful to ignore. When playing it on PS2, I do leave it on widescreen simply because I believe that was the intended experience. After all, in Ratchet 2, it's the default setting, and I don't feel like you lose much in screen real estate with the widescreen mode. The cutscenes are all built for 16:9 would be letterboxed otherwise, 2 things that make me think 16:9 has a slight edge over the 4:3 display. What is a more objective technical improvement is that this game is one of the few PS2 games that support progressive scan, or 480p resolution, which gives the game a cleaner and less jittery image than it would have been possible if you were to play it in 480i. Props to the game as well. It's one of the few games where the 480p option is just in the menu and not something you need to time your button presses for when the system's booting up. But moving on from the technical side of things and focusing more on the brand, you open the box and see that the manual is, once again, not your typical booklet. It's a pamphlet where it contains all the game mechanics and such, but written like the company, MegaCorp, is trying to sell you on how good the wrench is or how great the map works, containing little ads for in-game things like Slim Cognito's shop and Thugs for Less. It's homing in on the kind of humor that worked really well on Ratchet 1, leading into the premise of the game. Ratchet and Clank are being interviewed by a documentary series called Behind the Hero about their lives after having defeated Chairman Drek. And it's been pretty boring, actually.
Yesterday, I flushed out my radiator core.
Here we get to listen to Ratchet's new voice.
We're still pretty busy, but in a more, domestic sense.
Like I said, critics just didn't enjoy Ratchet as a character in the first game, so they wanted to make the character more likable, more down to earth. He still has an edge to him. I mean, this guy has no problem going to illegal weapon mod stores and using a lethal arsenal against his enemies, but he's just a neutral guy at the end of the day. He cares about his friends, can have a laugh, and is someone you can enjoy the screen time of now. James Arnold Taylor plays Ratchet in this game, and he fits great for this description. It's no surprise that he stuck around for every game after this. He just is Ratchet. No disrespect to Mikey Kelly, who voices Ratchet in the first game, as he did what the script demanded in that game, it just wasn't a super likable direction. When I was a kid and first got to Ratchet 1, I was really taken aback by Ratchet's voice, and then that was made even worse with the Clank arguments. It was just not something I was expecting to see from what I had gotten used to in the other 3 games that I had played. Having said that, Ratchet 1 is still canon, obviously, so the story benefits from that. Ratchet and Clank might be best friends with no conflict surrounding that in this game, but the arc they went through in Ratchet 1 was still a thing, so it's a relationship that feels earned. Anyway, things are dull for the duo until they're beamed onto a ship by the CEO of MegaCorp from the Bogon Galaxy, Abercrombie Fizzwidget. Mr. Fizzwidget needs the duo to infiltrate the headquarters of a thief that stole one of MegaCorp's top research projects, and Ratchet dives in immediately, while Clank instead takes a job working for MegaCorp, meaning that you'll spend the first several levels completely without Clank by your side, so you can't have the benefits like the Helipack, the Thruster Pack, and the Hydro Pack at the start of the game. Instead, it's just Ratchet and his basic mechanics. This gives you time to get to grips with how Ratchet handles now because it is eons better than the first game. I'm serious, it's the kind of mechanical improvement you can feel within seconds of playing the game. Handling Ratchet was my biggest problem with the first game, and here they fix it with what amounts to a short list, but a list of things that are absolutely essential. First, the controls are far more responsive. By that I mean you no longer skid before coming to a stop when moving the analog stick. His turns are much smoother than in Ratchet 1, and the double jump continues the forward momentum you had from the first jump. And most importantly, by holding down the L2 button while fighting enemies, Ratchet can now strafe around them. If you don't know what that means, I'm saying that when this button is pressed, moving the stick left, right, or backwards will see Ratchet move in that direction, but the character is still facing forward, allowing Ratchet to shoot his enemies while dodging their attacks. His inability to do that was the other fundamental issue with controlling Ratchet in the first game. This game fixes the flaws with that game's strafing, since access to it and getting out of it is as simple as pressing a button, and you can dodge while doing it. Another improvement to the combat mechanics would be how the quick select ring for your weapons pauses the action of the game, so you can stop and think about what weapon to use next instead of needing on-the-fly decision making. See what I mean? This is a small list of changes, but they completely change how you approach the game. Platforming? much improved because of the revamped jumping. Basic movement, much more comfortable to work with. Combat, this is also great because the dodge mechanics work in your favor this time around. It's not perfect though. You can go into a first-person view and aim at your foes in the air, but you still can't move in this mode, which just becomes really annoying at certain intervals. The lock-on works well enough in most cases, but take the MegaCorp boss fight for example, and my first time doing it for this playthrough lasted a couple minutes because I could not reliably aim upwards. Also, the fact that shooting is still on the circle button makes it awkward to control the camera and shoot, meaning that the claw grip is still a thing in this game. But the addition of strafing as well as better weapon and enemy design makes it so that these issues don't hamper my ability to enjoy playing Ratchet 2. Better combat mechanics warrant a discussion about the weapons you'll use to tear the enemies apart, with Ratchet and Clank 2 setting the precedent for the series that it's exciting to go into a new Ratchet and experiment with the weapons they have to offer. Here, we see the artists approach science fiction from a completely different angle than they did in the first game. Here in the Bogon Galaxy, the weapons are done by MegaCorp, and they do everything the exact opposite from Gadgetron in the first game. Here, the weapon design is far more futuristic and sleek. Compare something like the Pyrocitor from Ratchet 1 to the Lava Gun from Ratchet 2. A gun with some kind of fiery core that is contained well enough to spew a consistent stream of flames that clear waves of small enemies more effectively than the Pyrocitor. Or the Lancer, which has a more compact design than the Blaster, while also showing an exposed bit of the core energy it gets its shots from. Seeing different weapon designs is one thing, but the other important thing about getting new weapons is playing around with them. The first game's Blaster and this game's Lancer are the same type of weapon, fast projectiles, but they feel completely different to use, with the Lancer having a higher rate of fire and different sound effects. In general, the weapons in this game are several notches above Ratchet 1 in power. The Bomb Glove in Ratchet 1 was useful, but then you have a weapon with the range and impact of the Gravity Bomb in Ratchet 2. Not every weapon has a direct analog from Ratchet 1, but that's not really needed for you to feel just how much more powerful the weapons are. They can speak for themselves, like the Chopper. Discs that you toss as they tear into enemies and ricochet off the walls and continue attacking the enemies. Then there's other great weapons like the Mini Turret Glove, where you can toss out a couple at a time as they pop out and start blasting the enemies, doing chip damage while you attack with the bigger weapons. I also love using the Synthoids, 4 bots that follow you and attack enemies. Not with the same strength as the Sand Mouse gadget from Ratchet 1, but these guys are weapons that you can use on the fly, and not something you need to find in stages with a gizmo you got from a side quest. The Blitz Gun is a shotgun type weapon that obliterates crowds of enemies with these delicious sound effects. The Seeker Gun fires a homing device that upon finding an enemy will just fly right into them, doing massive damage. The Pulse Rifle is a sniper type weapon that allows you to zoom in on the enemies and hit them with greater precision. But the single greatest weapon in the game is the Bouncer. This is a bomb type weapon that upon exploding will separate into a bunch of tinier bombs that continue to explode into your enemies. This thing clears everything from small enemies to large enemies and boss fights. I will die on the hill of it being one of the best weapons in the series, but I think almost every weapon in this game is really powerful and useful. Listing them all will be redundant, because you get the point. This is one of the franchise's best weapon lineups because they're punchy and useful in their own right, but the fun doesn't have to stop with the weapons in their base form. This game introduces RPG mechanics into the series, as killing enemies consistently will upgrade your maximum health. Something you're definitely encouraged to do. I mean, doing it has this screen nuke effect, and who doesn't want to see everything fall before you like so? But for the weapons, consistently using that weapon will build up a gauge under the ammo count that when at max capacity will upgrade the weapon, like giving it more ammo, a faster rate of fire, a larger blast radius, upped damage, basically everything you could imagine that could make these weapons even more fun to use. Some upgrades just change the function of a weapon, and I don't really like those as much. Upgrades take a lot of time to get, so when the Lava Gun goes from being a long-range attack into a close-range Magma Blaster, it's kind of a letdown. Because it's not without use, it's just not the same weapon as it was before. But anyway, by the third stage, you've gotten to grips with these mechanics, and so that's when the story starts to ramp up. The mysterious thief hires a group called Thugs for Less that will attack Ratchet in the coming stages. The thief also captures Clank on the planet Endako, and Ratchet comes to his rescue as the two team up to fight back. This being where the player gets Clank back, as you can freely pick between the Helipack and the Thruster Pack. I'm pretty sure there's no advantage either way, because in this game they removed the mid-air dash from Ratchet 1, strafing is limited to it, and so on. So now it's just an aesthetic preference. As Ratchet and Clank explore the galaxy for the thief and the stolen experiment, that's when they start to realize that things are a bit off in the Bogon Galaxy. The first sign of this is when you reach the planet Barlow. The shot at the start of this stage is striking, as the whole level is set on the remains of a Gadgetron facility. MegaCorp has such a fierce grip over the galaxy's economy that Gadgetron, the leading innovator from the Solana Galaxy and Ratchet 1, has been completely run out of business. This level allows players to buy some Gadgetron weapons from the only remaining store. If you have a Ratchet 1 save file, you can get whatever weapons you had on that file for free. These weapons are basically here just to show you how weak they are compared to the new ones. I mean, the Tesla Claw, the Visibomb gun, these are weapons we used to tear everything to pieces one game ago, and they're all basically novelties now. That's just how much more powerful the stuff made by MegaCorp is. MegaCorp's weapons also can be leveled up when the ones from Gadgetron still can't. Running their competitors out of business in the Bogon Galaxy isn't where MegaCorp stopped though. They run this galaxy in every single aspect. In general, I think Ratchet 2 is where the series became more overt in regards to comedy being one of its defining characteristics, with fourth wall breaking gags.
Too late again.
We always seem to be a bit late. Why is that?
Or just physical humor.
Better add 6 crates of nitroglycerin and... Look, just give me double there. And I need it delivered.
Or the returning NPC conversations where Ratchet and Clank react to this cast of absolute morons on every planet.
Get lost before I flatten your robot into a hubcap.
Touch him, and it's Plasma City!
Oh gosh, you didn't have to yell.
And some funny references for those who would get it.
Sorry.
But a lot of that humor is still very satirical. Like I said about Ratchet 1, knowing common TV, celebrity, and cultural conventions allows for something like a company called Thugs for Less to be funny. It's the traditional presentation you'd expect with a service provider, paired with the idea that this company sells goons to any villain in need is really funny. Or this guy, Slim Cognito. He sells you illegal weapon mods and ship parts, and he has this commercial where he says,
"So next time you're in the market for some legally ambiguous refashioning, remember the name. Slim Cognitos. The only inspections we pass are yours."
One of my favorite NPCs in the series is the New Age Mystic. This guy is the perfect parody of the hipster archetype. He claims to be above material possessions, but the only way to get his help is to sell him crystals you find in the areas he's in. And the dry cynicism from Ratchet makes it really entertaining.
Hello? We've got more moonstones.
No, you have not.
What?
Existence is a lie. Sensations are illusions. Possessions are merely visions.
All right, I've got an illusion of some moonstones. I'll trade it for a vision of that hypnomatic part.
You have learned much, young one.
Like I said, Ratchet 2's humor is very much steeped in satire, but there are some points where you think that it's a little more like social commentary outright than just jokes. Ratchet and Clank finally catch the thief who talks like this.
You've lost, MegaCorp. Take your imperialistic eco-fascism to another dimension.
This person is stealing this experiment for a reason, we just don't know what that is. When Ratchet gets the experiment back, they bring it back to Fizzwidget, who leaves them behind, stranded on a desert planet. The thief confronts them and they find out that she's a woman named Angela who's trying to save the galaxy from MegaCorp's greed. The experiment is supposed to be a pet that MegaCorp can sell to the consumers called the Proto-Pet, and since it reproduces asexually and in mass quantities, they can make a quick buck with little work. The reason Angela tried to steal it was because she was one of the leading scientists at MegaCorp trying to fix the Proto-Pet's flaws, like eating people. But Fizzwidget pushed up the release date with no concern for the quality, and now MegaCorp's going to release a killer into the homes of millions. From this point on, what's interesting about Ratchet 2 is that there isn't really a central antagonist. The villain is MegaCorp as a company, one that has a monopoly over everything in the galaxy, from fashion to weapons to TV. I mean, everything in the entire Bogon Galaxy revolves around MegaCorp. This is shown in the map of the galaxy seen on the level select. MegaCorp's HQ, the final level, is literally the center of the galaxy and all other planets orbit around it. That's genius. As I was saying, MegaCorp is the villain of the game. In Ratchet 1, Gadgetron didn't really care about what happened as long as they got paid. I mean, they didn't care about direct invading their home planet on Kalibo 3. They made the weapons after all. But they weren't a villainous force in Ratchet 1 by any stretch of the imagination. In this game, you quickly realize that the propaganda parodies you watch in this game are supposed to be funny, but the point is that people are completely snowed by it, showing that what is on screen can be overt nonsense, but the right presentation and framing can convince people of anything. Like this ad where MegaCorp proves to the galaxy how great forest leveling is and the beauty of slave labor.
MegaCorp Manufacturing and Mining, a tireless drum major leading the galaxy on its march of progress. Come tour our desert mining facility and see why our most precious product is our history. When we first arrived, we found a planet completely overrun by rainforest. To better accommodate the local wildlife, we transformed this impassable jungle into an easily navigable desert. Ever the technological pioneer, MegaCorp invented the automated management team, thereby eliminating costly upward mobility. And all the while, making your life richer. MegaCorp Manufacturing and Mining. Our march continues to the tune of progress and profitability. Call Investor Relations today.
Desert levels are nothing new in video games, but when you play this one, it has the context of being a former rainforest that got leveled so MegaCorp could mine crystals with slave labor. Like, that's insane. But whenever this ad was made, they framed it as making people richer, so I'm sure the Boganites just didn't think of the real implications of what they were being sold. Like I just said, Angela's motivation is an act of rebellion against MegaCorp trying to release a product before it's finished, something I'm sure many game devs wished they could do. So now she and Ratchet and Clank are teaming up so they can stop the Proto-Pet menace. What's interesting about all of this is how it ties into the gameplay, because by the midpoint of the story, you know MegaCorp's a fucked up company, but working for them has some undeniably great perks. I mean, we've already talked about them being a monopoly, and that leads to them producing weapons that are of much higher quality than the ones from the first game, but this translates into the game mechanics in several other ways. Bolts are still the main currency of Ratchet 2, but this is a resource that is far less scarce than it was in Ratchet 1. I mean, seriously, the highest paywall in this game is 40,000 bolts. 10,000 bolts more than the most expensive weapon in Ratchet 1's shop, the Tesla Claw. You'll be showered in bolts this time around, and because of that, everything's more expensive at MegaCorp. If the method of getting bolts stayed consistent with Ratchet 1, then this would have been a chore, but Ratchet 2 made a fundamental improvement here as well. You can participate in what the manual calls maxi games. I see what they did there. The first of these are the arenas. MegaCorp runs 2 gladiator shows where contestants can enter and battle hordes of enemies. These are great for 2 reasons, first of which being that it gives you time to use your weapons and level them up, while also rewarding you with bolts for completing challenges. There are also 2 hoverbike tournaments that the player can enter. Hoverboard races existed in Ratchet 1, but I never bothered mentioning it because it didn't really factor into the game mechanics at all. Here, I did all the races because they reward you with bolts and you need those to buy weapons and progress. Doing the basic races is fun, but each extra race gets more challenging with having to dodge enemy attacks and master boosting off of ramps to get shortcuts. There will also be times where Ratchet must fight against an army of enemies in his ship, and you guessed it, they reward you for bolts for completing more challenges in these levels too. I loved these ship segments. I thought the controls were easy to get to grips with and the ship handled really well. Going to Slim Cognito's shack and buying upgrades like mines, torpedoes, and increased shield capacity completely changed the difficulty of these segments, and it's worth it because again, the bolt reward is high. There are also 2 planets full of crystals to find and sell to the New Age Mystic, where you earn thousands of bolts for collecting them all. Paywalls are still a thing in Ratchet 2, but I don't think these are ever annoying because I'm showering myself with bolts for the whole game. And since I'm no longer afraid of running out of bolts and not being able to make progress, I actually want to buy weapons, something you basically have to do in this game. I praised Ratchet 1's weapons for being useful all game long. Here, that is basically the exact opposite, but that's not really a flaw. In this game, weapons you find in the shop will be useful for a while, but once you reach the point where the shop has a bunch of new ones, the ones you already have won't be as good. What I mean by this is that the Lancer in its upgraded form is the go-to early game weapon, but by the end you might as well be firing a pea shooter because the enemies toughen up by the end, so you need to spend your large amount of bolts on some new weapons like the plasma coil or the bouncer. It sounds kind of annoying, but all these things combine to make an engaging gameplay loop. You just have to play ball with the game's mechanics to get the most out of it. If you try to stick with the early game weapons for the whole game, you're probably going to get wrecked, but if you experiment with the weapons, you'll find that this game is endlessly satisfying. You're incentivized to interact with the game's mechanics. Since you need bolts, you might as well play the maxi games, and why not? I mean, the arenas directly allow you to increase your max health and power of your weapons just by playing it. It's a cycle of rewarding game design. It doesn't stop once the game is over either. Ratchet 1 had a New Game Plus mode, but I didn't really see the need to play it because the golden weapon upgrades just costed more bolts than I could get. But in Ratchet 2, there is definitely a reason to play it, as the shop now has versions of your weapons that are leveled up to a 3rd stage, and when you buy them, you can upgrade them up to a 4th stage, something I did with the bouncer as soon as I could. There's a bolt multiplier which makes getting them easier. You'll be rewarded with more bolts for the maxi games than you were in the normal playthrough, like the Mystic giving you 10,000 bolts per crystal instead of 1,000, meaning you can now afford things like the new armors that buff Ratchet's defense and the game-breaking Rhino 2. This thing costs 1 million bolts, but you can afford it in New Game Plus and still have 200,000 bolts to spare, and it's worth every single one as the Rhino 2 tears through everything with more efficiency than the first one ever did. New Game Plus also gives you various extras, one of those being the first-person mode. They turned the first-person camera into a fully playable mode, and while the platforming isn't great, the shooting sure is. With FPS mode turned on, you can aim upwards while moving and shoot with the L2 button. Crucial improvement to the experience. And then the best thing, The combat has increased in quality so much from the first game, but it doesn't come at the cost of the exploration that made Ratchet 1 good. Now, I think Ratchet 1's a bit more open-ended here, but there are still really rewarding things to look out for this time around. Like how you can return to the planet Uzla after getting the gravity boots and find a secret boss fight that rewards you with an upgrade that shatters all nearby breakables. Never get sick of using that one. Or on the desert planet where the gravity boots unlock this hover car that can be used to get around the desert easier but can also be used to find raritanium. That's how you buy ship upgrades. What did I say? This game just rewards you for playing it. Having said that, I should mention that this game is not without flaws. Puzzles are back in this game, while the one where you switch panels to unlock doors is fine, and I really like using the Therminator, something you can use to freeze and unfreeze water, which gets several timing puzzles in a row on the planet Notak, but the other one with this laser redirection thing is just trial and error and really breaks the pace of the game. Then there's one of the worst bosses in the entire franchise, Ratchet and Clank against the thug leader on the planet Snivlik. What you have to do is sit in these turrets and blast his machine, and it takes all day. So what I do is blast him with the bouncer and do what I feel is more damage than the turrets do. The second crystal hunt's also kind of a pain in the ass because these Yeti enemies are ruthless and gang up on you. Lastly, there's the Hypnomatic quest. This is always the part of Ratchet 2 that I enjoy the least. Right at the end of the game, you'll find the first Hypnomatic part on Smaug, and then another on Grelbin, and the last one on Demuzel. I never really like backtracking in games, but this quest kind of requires you to do that because you can only assemble the Hypnomatic on Demuzel, but you need to use it on Grelbin. So you'll have to do the quest needed to get the part on Grelbin, then go back and play Demuzel, and then run back to Grelbin to finish the stage. In general, I think the climax is a little weak. For the entire second act of the story, Ratchet and Clank try to warn Fizzwidget that the protopet is dangerous when it's obvious he already knows this because he keeps trying to kill Ratchet and Clank and even outbids Angela at Thugs for Less with the intent to have them all killed. Once Ratchet, Clank, and Angela find out that the protopet is being sold galaxy-wide and is wreaking havoc, they set out for MegaCorp's HQ and try to find and stop the original protopet. This is where Fizzwidget reveals that he's actually Captain Quark. This would take a second to explain. Throughout the game, Ratchet and Clank tune into Behind the Hero, the documentary series the game opened on. These episodes you see throughout the game detail the fact that after Ratchet 1, Quark tried selling fake Gadgetron products, something we saw him do at the end of that game. He got arrested for it, but escaped jail to the Bogon Galaxy, where he took over MegaCorp and pushed up the release date of the protopet so that it would unleash a disaster that he could solve as Captain Quark, rebuilding his image as a hero, and now he's going to blame Ratchet, Clank, and Angela for what happened. But of course, the beast escapes and Ratchet and Clank stop it. The ultimate irony is that Ratchet and Clank are remembered as heroes once again just by being heroic instead of coming up with a big scheme like Captain Quark does, really his lowest point as a character. But the final boss is actually pretty lame. With a fully loaded bouncer, you can make quick work of the thing. There really isn't even that much to say because it goes down really easy. The build-up and the intrigue surrounding MegaCorp was really well done, but I think the ending is pretty rushed. Angela finds the real Fizzwidget, who was tied in a broom closet for months, while Quark was impersonating him. Credit due to the writers, they immediately distinguished Fizzwidget from Quark, as Quark did this weird thing when he was pretending to be Fizzwidget where he got all his words wrong.
But it's steeped in hysterics. I've offloaded the condiments to your naval computer.
But the real Fizzwidget is well spoken in his one scene.
Gentlemen, you have my most profound gratitude.
But I think this resolution to the story was just too easy. Quark is down, the protopet menace is stopped, the end. What goes completely unresolved is the fact that MegaCorp was established as a fucked up company that ruled the galaxy, but that's just kinda dropped at the end because I guess the real Fizzwidget is a nice guy. All's well that ends well. But even after saying that list of negatives, every time I finish it, I sit back and think, Ratchet and Clank 2 is one of my favorite games of all time. This is not a game without flaws, but goddamn, this game is just incredibly engaging to play. This is the perfect sequel. It takes everything from Ratchet 1 and does most, if not all of it, better. They saw the strengths of Ratchet and Clank as a brand and zeroed in on all those things, making the series even stronger than it was before. When I play this game, I never want to put the controller down. It's fantastic. I said that about Ratchet 1, but that was in spite of the massive issues I have while playing that game. Here, the issues I do have don't stop me from saying this is my favorite game in the series. Like I said at the start, this isn't at the top of my list of favorite games, but that's okay. That's not a bad thing because whenever I do play it again, I'm happy to see that a game from my childhood holds up so well, now almost 20 years after it originally released, as I always find new ways to enjoy it. When you're a kid, the real meat and potatoes of the satire goes over your head, but that's why it keeps getting better every time I play it. I have unforgettable memories attached to this game from when I was a kid playing it alongside watching Justice League Season 2, which I detailed in my video on that season. I have memories of getting back into it when the HD collection came out, memories of making my first video on it, and now just appreciating it today for the masterful sequel it is. I really do love Ratchet and Clank 2. It's everything I want from a game. But of course, we're not done yet, because next week we'll be looking at Ratchet and Clank 3, Up Your Arsenal. If you want it now, join the Patreon. If not, then I'll leave you with the usual outro. Thanks everyone for watching, and I'll see you next time.
So, whatever happened to Quark?
I heard he was working at MegaCorp.
All right, fellas, nice and tight now. So you tested this, right? Oh, wait, that's why I'm here. Oh, one more thing.